Well, when you say superior beings, I think the key word we're looking for here is we think we're gods. The whole point about the story based on Greek myth is that we keep finding this happening in life. Actually, Apollo didn't mean that. What Apollo meant when he said, know thyself, was he said, know your limits as a human being, that you are not a god.
Hi everybody and welcome back to Nick Talks. This episode's amazing guest, first time on the channel, is a gentleman you may not have heard of unless you're really into Greek mythology and unless you've just bought his new book. My guest today is James Sale. How you doing, James?
Well, thank you, Nick, for inviting me. It's really a pleasure to be here with you. You're such an upbeat kind of guy. It's always fun. So I'm in pretty awesome form, I think, and I'm really looking forward to this chat with you.
Excellent. A joint friend of ours gave me your book about a month ago, and here's your book here. Yep. Gods, Heroes, and Us. I always like being given books I never heard of because it's always a surprise when you get it and read it, as opposed to hearing about a book, then you wanting it, going out and getting it, and it's never always what you think it's going to be about. I'm into mythology. I've got a bookcase full of all sorts of things there. And I intend to write a book on mythology one day. My take will be this. My take will be, we've had civilizations before, high level civilizations, and maybe something like a meteor hit the earth, destroyed everything, and we started again. And that's where a lot of myths started from. An example I would give you would be the flying carpet in Arabian Nights. So maybe we had flying machines in the past and then we lost all technology and we were trying to describe to somebody how we used to travel. And we said something like, well, you'd sit down a bit like on a rug and it would take off and you would go. And I'd like to write a book on that one day. But this discussion is not about a book I've not written. It's about your book, about Greek mythology. And how...
Pick up a point you've made, though. Can I pick up a very point you've made? It's very profound. You see, what you've said is that that in the past people were not actually ignorant and primitive, and as we like to imagine, that we've progressed so far ahead of them. When you look at all the major mythologies, the Greek one in particular, but the Indian ones and other ones as well, there's a sense in which actually we've regressed. That in the past, in fact, there was a golden age, then a silver age, then a bronze age, and now we're actually in the iron age, which is the worst age of all. And to talk specifically, when you talk about the flying carpet, and the example I would use would be the pyramids, the Great Pyramids. I mean, those pyramids, we had 240-ton blocks, absolutely perfectly engineered, and I think they're within 8 minutes of true north. I mean, a minute is a 60th of 1 degree of true north. We never got to that accuracy again until the Royal Observatory went up in Greenwich in the late 19th century.
Please excuse this interruption. England is an amazing country, from ending the slave trade to the Industrial Revolution to creating the modern world.
So the level of accuracy of that, and to move those blocks, we've hardly got a crane alive that can actually lift them, never mind get them to this knife edge of accuracy. Now, how did they really do it? So how did they fly on the flying carpets? How did they create these pyramids? Frankly, there was something going on in the past that we really have got very little idea about, except via these myths.
Exactly. So these myths are stories, I would imagine, based around knowledge and learning that somebody was trying to pass on. If you want to pass something on, you create a narrative that someone can remember. That's what nursery rhymes are for, stories are for us to pass information on in a way that helps us remember it. We like stories. We're a story-driven creature. We tell each other stories all the time. We tell children stories. And in those stories to children, there's always morals to those stories. So they're being entertained but learning at the same time. And that's what I find your book is basically about. So first of all, let's quell the myth that people who came before us were idiots. They weren't idiots. They just didn't have the technology that we have today. And just because me and you have technology, me and you have an iPhone in our pocket, that doesn't make us intelligent. We're stood on the shoulders of people who are better than us. That's why we've got a phone in our pocket. We don't know how it works. We couldn't make one. So just because we have technology, we fooled ourselves into thinking we're superior beings, and we're not. We're
Well, when you say superior beings, I think the key word we're looking for here is we think we're gods.
Yes, we
We
do.
think we think we're gods, and actual fact, therefore, the rules don't apply to us. And we see this in all sorts of ways. But to go back again, you make so many interesting points. To the first point you made in this, you know, Professor Brian Cox said, narrative may be regarded as a primary act of mind. In other words, we can only understand reality through stories. We don't, and in fact, that includes scientific knowledge. So, for example, there are very, very, very few scientists who can understand reality purely in terms of mathematics. There are some, I'm sure, but very, very few. For the rest of us mortals, including most scientists, we actually have to have a story. So, a story, for example, like an apple fell on Newton's head while he was sitting in the garden, and lo and behold, that's what gravity is. Or there's a big bang. I mean, there's a big bang. Who's heard this big bang? A big bang, and suddenly everything kicks off. It's a story. And through the story, we understand the scientific principle behind it. So we can only grasp reality through these stories.
Yeah. And we must find certain stories valuable. Otherwise, we wouldn't remember them and we wouldn't pass them on. Now, if we go to Greek mythology, these stories are what, 2.5, 3,000 years old at least. We must, even today, we must find them valuable. We must find some value in them. Otherwise, we would forget them. How many films have you watched where you don't even remember watching it? Because for you, there was no value in it. Therefore, your mind didn't spend the energy remembering it. But certain films, like something like Schindler's List, you'll remember watching that because not only was it a good story, that there was a lesson in that you remembered. Now, let's jump into your book. Before we get into detail of the book, my first question is, what made you write it?
Well, essentially, I have been a feature writer for New York's The Epoch Times now for 6 or 7 years, and I'm a feature writer on myth and poetry. So sometimes once, sometimes twice a month. So it's I've got well over 120 articles now that have appeared. And so when I started writing for them 7 or 8 years ago, I found myself, for example, I think one of the first, it wasn't the first, but certainly in the first 10 or 12 articles I did for them, I suddenly found myself writing a series of articles about Odysseus, whom, incidentally, having mentioned film, there is a new film coming out on Odysseus starring Matt Damon very shortly. So talking about how the myths 3,000 years later endure, a perfect example. We want to see Matt Damon as Odysseus in this film. It's such a gripping story. 2 chapters of my book are all about the Odysseus myth. So I started writing these stories, these articles rather, for the Epoch Times in New York. And I found, of course, as I got into it more and more and more, I was exploring it more and more and more. It's always been an interest of mine since I was, 5 years old. And then I began to realize there was a book in all this. There was a book that I could write independently of my articles for the Epoch Times. And so I'm still writing for the Epoch Times. In fact, I've currently got a series of articles on Heracles, the 12 labors of Heracles. I've had 8 published so far, and I've just submitted the ninth labor of Heracles.
Also known as Hercules.
Also known as Hercules. Yeah, the Greek name is Heracles, but in the Latin it's Hercules. So I try to stick with the Greek because I'm dealing with Greek myths. But you're quite right. It's much more. But again, another person whom we love in film and in TV series, Hercules, the great strong man. So that's really how it led to the book. And funnily enough, I'm a businessman. I am shortly selling my business and devoting myself full time to writing. I'd like to write more books on the Greek myths, and I'd also like to go down the line of some of the Old Testament stories and revealing just because you'll know from reading my book, I regularly cross-reference the Greek stories to some of the great stories in the Old Testament. So I would like to do that as well. Write a book on the Old Testament stories. I mean, to call them. See, I think the other thing is to call them myths makes me well. Then I don't believe they're true. But the whole point of the myth is the myth is true. In fact, one definition of a myth is that a myth is a story about something that happened once, but which continues to happen. And so the thing about this, so for example, Freud's the Oedipus complex, the whole point about the story based on Greek myths is that we keep finding this happening in life. It's not that it just happened to Oedipus, that he killed his father and he married his mother. In fact, in different formations, this goes on happening.
Mm. You mentioned the Old Testament then, and I did realise that I do remember you cross-referencing some of the stories with that. And what that told me straight away was it wasn't the particular story that was the important part. It wasn't Hercules. It didn't have to be Athena. It was the result of those stories. So even though the Old Testament may have a different story, the outcome of the story is the same because that was a lesson they're trying to teach you. So characters may change, weapons may change, the country may change, but the morality of the story and the lesson they want you to remember is exactly the same. And
Yes,
that's
there is.
big. Yeah.
Yes, yes, you're all right. There is a deep morality. There is a deep meaning. Another word I would like to use a lot. There's a deep meaning in these stories, and actually, everybody in their life, if they're actually alive at all, because let's be honest about it, some people are not really alive. They're just living, but they're not really alive. We all want meaning. All of us at some point ask ourselves, what is the meaning of my life? What should I, and as a result of that, what should I do in my life? And these stories help us get a grip on the meaning and the morality. And can I just say on the subject of morality, and this is quite an important point, and I'm sure you've picked it up from the book. When we talk about morality in the West now, we often use this in a very sort of detrimental way, as if morality is something for fuddy-duddies, it's rule bound, it's negative, it stops people expressing their creativity, their freedom, and it's not a good thing. But the truth of the matter is it's exactly the opposite. And the thing that people don't understand is they think that morality is something like politics or philosophy or theology or something else or art or poetry. It's a discipline. There are all these different things, and morality is one of them. It's not one of those things at all. Morality is the something that should inform all these other things. Without a very strong sense of good and evil, for example, just to take that the most obvious aspect of morality, there is good and there's bad. You don't have politics. You don't have philosophy. You don't have art. You have none of these things. You just have, actually, what you have is incipient chaos. Things, to use Yeats's expression, fall apart. And I think we are, if I was to say something slightly controversial now, I hope you won't mind me saying it, but in this country, the UK at the moment, we are possibly at a falling apart moment because our sense of morality is actually disintegrating. And this is reflected in a whole number of ways in terms of our justice system, our law and order, and a whole range of things which actually indicate it's not there. It's going, it's evaporating. And it's very, very worrying.
Oh, it's extremely worrying. I remember reading in the book when you discussed or mentioned morality. For me, I think we reject morality because for some reason, we value the individual above all else now. For me, morality is not necessarily putting yourself first, it's putting everybody else first. It's putting your family first, your tribe, your country, your nation. That's where morality for me is based around, where we reject that now and we put my human rights first, my personal opinion first, what I want to do comes first. And if we have
Well, summed up in my truth is supposed to top anything else. Nothing can override the fact, oh, that's my truth, so you can't argue against it. What a ludicrous position to be in. How a ludicrous position. There are five people in the room. There either is or there isn't. And whether you think there's four or whether you think there's six is actually irrelevant. We can count there's five. There's an objective reality out there, and morality is objective, despite all the cultural differences that actually arise over time. There is a core sense in which thieving, for example, is wrong. Murder is wrong. We all know that. Why do we keep pretending that it's not? That, oh, there are special circumstances when murdering people or raping women. That's okay then. No, it's not okay. It's really fundamentally that is what we have to draw the line at. This, as you say, this moral line. By the way, on the positive side, if that sounds like, oh, it's all about no, you cannot. The thing about morality is it's a limiting factor, and it's through limits that we become creative. It's the same in art and poetry. I'm a poet. And, I don't write free verse because it's chaos. There's no form, therefore there's no beauty, therefore there's no power. That's why so much modern art is so bad, because there's no form. Anyone just splashes paint on a canvas, puts some conceptual thing up and says, oh, that's art. It's not art. It's just a mess. And it's the emperor's new clothes. People just get hypnotized into thinking that this is something meaningful when it's not meaningful. But to come back to the myths, of course, this is what the myths are giving us. They're giving us a structure to see this more clearly.
Absolutely. If someone said to me, Nick, pick a story out of the book that had meaning, that you found meaning in, and that you could explain to somebody, the one I would pick straight away would be King Midas. So for people who don't know, King Midas, from my recollection, he did something good to one of the god's friends or something, and he got a wish, basically. He got a wish, and he said, I wish everything I touch would turn to gold, because he just wanted wealth. So he got the wish. But then he realized almost immediately, no matter what he touched turned to gold, which isn't always the best thing, because he couldn't eat, he couldn't drink. If he touched a loved one, they would turn to gold. His desire for simplicity of wealth ruined his life. And that's, you can transcribe that now into the modern world. We chase money. That's all we seem to do. We chase money. We don't value our families, our friendships, our children. That's why we're murdering 300,000 babies in the UK every year. We don't value life. We just value money because we've been led to believe money equates with happiness. And if you look at the people the big winners of the UK lottery, I've read an article about it. Many of them, I can't remember the percentage now, but many of them say they're sorry they ever won it, because it changed their lives in ways they couldn't believe. They lost friends over it. Friends stole money from them. Their marriage broke up because of it. And they regret winning 10, 20 million. Most people can't imagine that could be a bad thing. But again, the Midas touch, we've been told about this for at least 3,000 years, that if you get what you wish for, with no hard work, with no consequences, with no planning, with no anything else, if you're just given it, it can turn into a negative. And that's what I liked about the Midas touch story.
Well, can I elaborate on that story so we can get a fuller sense of it all, but also elaborate on what is underpinning what was so wrong with it in the first instance? So one of the key concepts of the book is that for the Greeks, the ancient Greeks, the key for them, sin, we call sin in the sort of Western tradition, but the key sin for them was a word that they called hubris. So the worst possible thing you could do in life, the worst possible thing, bar none, was to offend, reject, insult, ignore a god. That was the worst possible thing you could do. And maybe I could read a little extract from the book about that, from chapter 2 in a minute, about Capaneus, who was a famous example of somebody who committed hubris. But humans commit hubris, and Midas committed hubris. In fact, this particular hubris involving his touch involved Silenus, who was the father-in-law of the god Bacchus, who got rather drunk and turned up. And so basically, Midas realized immediately who he was, and immediately, therefore, had a plan. And the plan was, I am going to look after him. He invited him in, he honored him, he fed him and reveled and drank with him for 10 nights in a banquet, and saying what a wonderful person he was. And and of course, Silas was a satyr, which is one of those kind of slightly anarchic, hedonistic, good life kind of characters. And so when Bacchus found this out, his father-in-law had been looked after by Midas. He was incredibly grateful. So he said to him, "Oh, thank you for looking after my father. What can I do for you?" And here was the first example of hubris. Because the example I give in the book is like, imagine that, you are a parent and you've got to go and collect your child from primary school, and you're held up in the traffic, and somebody knows who that child is in the school, another parent, and they actually see the child outside waiting. They pick them up and they take them home safely, and they deliver them to your door. And you say, "Oh, thank you so much. I was so worried. What can I do for you?" And you say, "Oh, there's a 5 bedroom house going for sale just down the road. I'd love to live in it. Could you buy that 5 bedroom house for me? So it's like the actual demand itself was hubristic. It was absolutely out of all proportion to what he was actually deserved and worth. So when you talk about winning the lottery, really, in a sense, yeah, I get it why people do the lottery. But to win £20 million is out of all proportion to what you deserve for what you've done. It's really kind of, it's disorientating in itself. Then he's given this power and he finds that he actually, as you rightly pointed out, he can't even eat anymore. This power is clogging up his whole life, everything. And here's another key thing about this: is like he's turning the living world, into a thing. You know, the world was created for human beings to live in it and to have all these animals and plants and growing things. And suddenly everything's becoming like a rock. It's becoming solid gold. Well, you know, there's no value in it. It's just destroying life. He is destroying life. So the request itself destroys life. And not only that, it means he wants to be richer than everybody else. I can be better than you because I've got more gold than you. So it leads to this hubris again of imagining that you are more than you think you are. So in this case, the story ends not unhappily because Bacchus revoked, when he's begged by Midas to take the gift away, gives him a simple process of bathing in a river where he can actually be released of it. But the thing that's interesting about the story, which I go on to say, is that in this instance of hubris, Midas learns absolutely nothing from it. Bacchus, of course, was sympathetic to him because he was a worshipper of Bacchus. He was the god that he worshipped. You know, this god of wine and drink and orgies and excess. That was actually who he worshipped. Subsequently, he offends, I won't go into the details, it's too long, but basically the god Apollo. He offends the god Apollo, and so Apollo gives him ass's ears. His ass's ears that he's given, and this leads directly to his death and disgrace in humiliation. So he learns nothing from the story, he learns nothing from it, and then he goes and does it again with a very different kind of god, and it kills him. So, you know, this hubris is really, really important. But can I, with the risk of, I think, because it's such a sensational passage, it's not mine, it comes from Statius, the Roman writer, tell you of one of the most incredible stories about hubris, about defying the gods. So basically, Capaneus is colossal, fearless, and virtually unstoppable. He's a warrior. He's one of 7 warriors who are going to destroy the city of Thebes. 7 gates, 7 entrance points, 7 warriors, and Capaneus is the bravest, strongest of them all. And he scales the ladder, and as he reaches the top, he screams a taunt against all the gods. Where are the sluggard sons of this accursed land, Bacchus and Alcides? Any lesser name I am ashamed to challenge. Rather come thou, what worthier antagonist? For lo, Semele's ashes and her tomb are in my power. Come thou and strive with all thy flames against me, thou Zeus. Or art thou braver at frightening timid maidens with thy thunder? He actually says, I'm about to scale the walls. Nobody can stop me. Stop me if you can, king of the gods. Even the gods themselves began to wonder whether Zeus was able to stop the fearless Capaneus. But then, even as he spoke, the thunderbolt struck him, hurled with the whole might of Zeus. His crest first vanished into the clouds, the blackened shield boss dripped, and all the hero's limbs were now illuminated. The armies both give way in terror where he may fall, what squadrons he may strike with his burning body. He feels the flame hissing within him, and his helmet and hair afire. And trying to push away the galling cuirass with his hand, touches the scorched steel beneath his breast. He stands nevertheless, and turning towards heaven, pants out his life, and leans his smoking breast on the hated battlements, lest he should fall. But his earthly frame deserts the hero, and his spirit is released. Yet Had his limbs been consumed a whit more slowly, he might have expected a second thunderbolt. Isn't that wonderful? If it had been just slightly slower, his death, Zeus would have actually zammed him again. It's very manifest and it's very different from the Midas story, but it's hubris. It's this imagining that we are God. And the book gives lots of contemporary examples of how we do this, where when we try and knock asteroids off course because we think we can stop them coming to the planet, or when we start with Bill Gates dimming the sun to stop climate change, despite the fact that 20 more people die of cold on the planet than actually die of heat. So all this is kind of like hubris, where we think we are gods and we can control everything. So the book, in one sense, is a salutary warning. It's a warning against this overreach, human overreach.
That was excellent. But let me put the question that somebody would ask me to you. So if you had to pick one story out the book that people could learn something from, that there's meaning there, and especially it's relevant in today's world, which all the stories are. I mean, that's why you wrote the book. But which story would you point out to say, that's the one I would tell someone about?
That is a very, very difficult question. It's a very, very, very difficult question because there are stories in this book which are particularly relevant. I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll try and tell you two stories. One which I'll be very brief about, which is particularly relevant to me, but one which I think is the big over picture. And the big over picture, which is perhaps not so exciting as perhaps the Odysseus story, or as exciting as the Midas story, or the Pandora story, which are all very exciting stories. But in fact, it's good. So my favorite god of the gods is actually Apollo. So the brief thing about the story of Apollo, which is why I find it so powerful, is that Apollo is the god, firstly, of the sun. So to understand what that means, it means light. So on the one hand, we're talking about physical light, but of course, on the other hand, we're talking about understanding, the light of the mind that understands. In other words, we're talking about rationality when we talk about Apollo. He's the god of proportion. He's the god of rationality. But he's not only the god of light, he's also the god of healing. And I'm sure you're aware there's plenty of light therapies, which actually are all about how light and how we're advised by doctors to go out every day and have the light, and vitamin D comes through our eyes, and light is healing. So he's the god of healing. He's also the god of prophecy. The Delphic oracle, he's Delphi, where he had his special shrine, where, in other words, you could tell the future from consulting Apollo. Well, of course, this is part of further extension of the understanding. The understanding of how things are means that you can actually see what is going to happen. And then fourthly, which is still absolutely incredible, is the god of poetry. So the god of poetry and healing are absolutely, and prophecy are intimately, if you go to William Blake or somebody like that, the prophecies of Blake and the poetry of Blake, and of course this whole idea of it being a healing modality. Writing is a healing modality, and they produce light, the light of understanding. So what you've got within the god Apollo, and just even the attributes, never mind the stories the stories are incredible, but there is within just the attributes of what he's god of, these most incredible sort of interaction and interlinking between it. So, if you want to heal yourself, actually writing is a fabulous modality for trying to heal yourself. To try to, people say, become more self-aware. Well, how do you do that? Well, you can have a shrink, you can get a coach, you could actually do, you could ask your best friend, and you can keep a journal and you can write about yourself. You can write poetry. In fact, all of these things are intimately connected. So my first story then is to say, well, I find that absolutely fascinating. So if you're interested in Apollo, look at my book to find out some other things Apollo does, which are really quite incredible. But the big story really kicks off the whole book, because the big story is about the creation of the world. And the kickoff point in Greek mythology is really not with Uranus and Gaia, the earth and the sky. They are principles which merge, creating the Titans, the most famous of whom is Kronos, from which we get the word chronometer, and from which we get the concept of time. And from that idea of time, and of course, Kronos eats his own children because he doesn't want any of them to replace him as top dog. So what we're talking about is we're in a world in which it's a dog eat dog world. Everything eats everything else. And if you've got might, might is right. And this is true of time, of course, because time, every second, each new second. Each second has to be eaten for another second to actually emerge. So there's something in the structure of the universe which is all about it's eating itself, and it's dog eat dog, and it's really bad. But one son, Zeus, escapes this fate through a ruse, basically escapes out of the dog eat dog chaos world that we're in, this primeval world that's really dreadful. And when he does escape it, he defeats his father and creates a different kind of world altogether, a universe that's got no bearing on the universe that went before, except this universe that went before keeps on trying to erupt into the world we're now in. We'll come to that in a moment. But what does this actually mean? What it means is, I mean, Zeus is called Father Zeus, but why isn't his own father, Father Kronos? Because his own father doesn't count anymore. Because what Zeus does when he actually takes control of the universe is he introduces order. Another word for order is meaning. He introduces order, which leads to law, which leads to justice, which leads to hierarchy, which leads to stability, which leads to peace, and actually, finally, it leads to beauty. Now, the thing about this is Zeus himself is bound by his own rules. See, Kronos wasn't bound by anything. It was just whatever you could get, whatever you could do. But Zeus is. If you swear by the river Styx, it cannot be revoked. It cannot be changed. So Zeus comes under law himself. And Zeus becomes the father of lawmaking. And from the modern world's point of view, you might say, well, that's no big deal. You know, justice, well, actually, that is a big deal still. But hierarchy is absolutely essential to have stability and peace. So when people talk about, for example, equality, everything needs to be equal, what they're really saying is what we want is chaos, because nothing is equal. Everything is hierarchical. Zeus is at the top. The sons and daughters beneath him are, you know, the council, Olympus, the council of the gods, they're under that. And then you have this layer of human society, animal society, and it's layered, and there's a structure, and the structure interacts to create this order. And so having established the order, there are periodically eruptions in which chaos, another name for chaos would be evil, tries to bring it down again. And that is why, for example, the stories of Hercules, are so powerful, because he is the greatest of the sons of Zeus, whose mission on earth is to continue the work of his father to destroy the monsters that want to overtopple the order of the universe. And by the way, hell, Hades, is the place where everything which is disordered is consigned and held forever. So that is the place where disorder, chaos, and everything that can't fit into the order of the universe, all that's ugly, goes into hell. So, and of course, one of the middle of the book is all about Orpheus. The very middle of the book is the journey into hell and what it means to go down as a musician and poet into hell. So that to me, that kind of idea of creating the order, leading to the beauty that we see in the world, and it's all the time being threatened by the forces of chaos and evil, all the time being threatened, which is our own reality now.
Yeah, yeah. And you can break down that chaos and evil. You can break it down into things like, you know, the seven deadly sins, you know, like jealousy and envy and you know, these are the things that we class as evil because over centuries and millennia, clever people have realized they're the traits that lead to chaos, and chaos leads to disruption and to death and to everything else. Hence why
they break community.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, and they break community. What we want is community and peace with other people. But these sins, the seven deadly sins, is a great example. They are specifically, every one of them will actually lead to discord between people and terrible things.
Yeah, I remember somebody saying to me once about adultery, because that's one of the Ten Commandments, thou shalt not commit adultery. And they were saying, who cares? That's how old-fashioned the Bible is. The more I thought about it, the more I realized the reason why adultery is in the Ten Commandments is for this reason, because many people saw what happened when people committed adultery. You would have, the spurned man would get angry. He would probably kill the other man, maybe kill his wife. That would leave their children as orphans. It might start a blood feud with the other people's family because he's now killed one of them. And next thing you know, the whole village, the whole town are killing each other. And you can trace it all back to adultery. That's why adultery was put in the Ten Commandments, because not because of the act itself, but because what the act leads to in society.
Mm. Yeah, and we see it all the time. And you're absolutely right. Well, in terms of the seven deadly sins, of course, it's the sin of lust, and in terms of the Ten Commandments, it's in a way it's reiterated twice because you have thou shalt not commit adultery and also thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife. So in fact, you actually this kind of lusting and wanting to possess things, which comes back to your Midas story, where you want to own everything yourself, and this is another thing about what I'm deeply into in the book. It's about limits, and this is so. Let's go back to Apollo. So Apollo's first maxim is to know thyself. Now this has been misinterpreted in the West to mean, so know thyself is Apollonian wisdom. It's been misinterpreted in the West to mean, so, do a psychometric test, find out all about yourself, think about yourself, become self-aware. Actually, Apollo didn't mean that. What Apollo meant when he said know thyself was he said, know your limits as a human being, that you are not a god. Fully comprehend, brood on it, think about it. And, in fact, the equivalent in the Old Testament to that would be, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Fear of the Lord, because you'd only fear the Lord if you actually were aware of that transcendental reality that was greater than yourself and what that could actually mean for you. And Apollo's saying the same thing with know yourself. Know that you're just a man or just a woman. And in fact, there's a reality above you which actually is far more powerful than you are. And you should actually respect it. So it's about having respect in a way at some deep level. And to have that respect by transference is to have a respect for life. Is to have a respect for life that we still, scientists go on and on, don't they? Keep trying to reproduce life in the laboratory and they never get anywhere with it, and they never will, because in fact we know at some level this was something, I'll use a word perhaps inadvisedly, but like almost magical, something that divine, something spiritual, something that just we as physical beings cannot really replicate. It's not in our power to do that, but here we are. We keep going for it.
Oh, we do, because we've convinced ourselves that we are gods. That's why we rejected God. Probably 150 years ago, we thought we were gods, and we're not. We're far from being gods. Let's end on this. Are you writing another book? If not, you're probably planning another book. What's your next book going to be about?
Well, um, it's really strange, actually. I've actually written 5 books for Routledge, the publisher Routledge, called Mapping Motivation, and this is actually sort of a business book. And mapping motivation for engagement, mapping motivation for leadership. And I'm actually on a contract to do a last and 6th book for it called Mapping Motivation for Students, which I'm co-writing with a Chinese writer in China. And so I have a book which I am writing, my next book, I'm not sure, but there's a business book coming out. But I'm also, once I've sold my business, which I hope to do this year, looking to write either a sequel to God's Heroes and Us or to move towards doing a book on the Old Testament. So the Bruges Group have published this book. It's fabulous. I'm very happy. Robert Olds has been a great guy for me. He's been really helpful. Whether the Bruges Group would want another book or not, I don't know. So I may be looking for a new publisher for that. But basically, I want to get more of this kind of work out.
Yeah. Oh, I definitely think you should. This is the sort of book people need to be reading. We need to be going beyond just what the Cardassians are saying and thinking. We need to be looking backwards, because as that old saying goes, how do you know where you're going if you don't know where you've been? So it's about looking backwards to make sure the journey forward.
Exactly so. Yes, exactly, Nick.
James, I'm going to put links to your book in the description of the video. So if this has been an interesting conversation, please go in the description and please buy this book. You won't regret it. I thoroughly enjoyed reading it. And James, if you have another book like this coming out, please let me know and you can come back on and let's discuss the next book along these lines.
Well, thank you, Nick, so much for inviting me. It's been a fabulous conversation. As I said to you at the start, which was not on the tape at the moment, but I love the stuff behind you, all those kind of interesting cultural things you've got. It's really great. So thank you so much. It's been a blast, and hopefully I'll be talking to you again. And I shall promote this obviously myself when the link's out.
Yep, that's great. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.